So while everyone's getting settled, let me just say a couple quick thank yous. First to Apex Assembly for having myself, having this group of esteemed professionals that we'll introduce in just a second here. And thank you all for coming and being part of this. It's been a while since we've probably been at these things. I remember years ago having actually spoken in this room. I remember these two pillars right here on the side. So the people sitting behind it, that is the guilt-free zone to be on your phone and your computer, because I can't see you from here. So feel free. You don't even have to pretend to look up behind those seats. Thank you to all those who are live streaming our event today. Appreciate the attendance. This is obviously an important topic. This is something that I think is very relevant in today's world. And as we go through this next hour, I'd like to challenge us as to the very existence of why we have to have this topic and why we have to have this panel. And I think that in and of itself speaks to some of the challenges and the issues of a very important matter out there for a lot of people. So with that, let me go ahead and just start with some introductions here. On the panel today, we have Phyllis Woodruff from Global Payments. She's the VP of IT Risk and Compliance. And Phyllis, thank you for joining us here today. How about a quick introduction on who you are and what you do?
Let's start with, is my mic really on? And I think so. Okay. Thank you very much, Grant. I, at this point, lead a team that spans most of North America, as well as I have resources in the UK. That's actually a fairly small footprint for me, and in prior lives, I've handled teams in Singapore, certainly in India, and in Costa Rica. So diversity is something that, for me, comes very, very naturally, and it means we've got different lenses on the same problem.
Great, thank you. And then to my left here, Christy Pruitt, who is the SVP and CIO of SP Richards. Christy, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, it's a pleasure. Yes, I'm recently the CIO at SP Richards, so I'm still getting my my feet wet and getting my legs straightened out. So I was formerly the VP of IT. I've been at SP Richards for 15 years now. So just getting my feet wet and learning how to handle everything day to day.
Wonderful. I had the pleasure of meeting Christy for the first time a couple months ago, and it was clear from the start that we had a lot in common and shared a lot of the same pains and challenges. So great to have her on this panel with me. To my right here is Denise Smith. She's the Senior Director of Enterprise Technology at Cox Automotive.
Hello, everyone. So my role kind of fits between product strategy, operations, and then venture. So more so on the side of, going out and scouting and seeing what we could get to bring into our corporation and also helping them scale. But as I'm moving into looking at what I'm going to do next, this conversation is very important to me because I really think that it's hard sometimes to find the opportunities that are already slated for somebody that's in succession for it. So that's why I feel like this conversation is important.
That's great. Thank you, Denise. And then to the very far left, Mr. Joe Marroquin. He's the CISO of Encompass Digital Media, the aforementioned dominant player in the playout space.
Thanks, Grant, and thanks everyone for inviting us to be here. As Grant mentioned, I'm the CISO for Encompass Digital Media. I also handle compliance globally for the company. So I think Grant and I have traveled the same roads, I think, to an extent. We were both at Accenture together a while ago, and we're at Encompass together as well. So we're kind of old hands, I think. And this is an important topic, I think. I think to Grant's point, I think at some point, maybe we won't need to have panels like this, but for now, I think we have them, and I think we probably should try to use them to their maximum value.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. So again, thank you all for being here. Let's start with our very first question here, which is, what is your personal definition of diversity and inclusion within leadership? So to that end, Phyllis, how about you kick us off?
Well, I'm very happy to share that Global Payments has a management team that is very, very focused on diversity and have been for a number of years. Our CIO is, in fact, sponsor of our Women's Network, our executive sponsor. We are also, as managers, challenged on an ongoing basis to meet our resources where they are, whether it's within their time zone, within their culture, and that level of appreciation helps to create a stronger team. Ours is a very empathetic culture, and for me, that's very, very positive. One of the important things about diversity is the strength that it brings to teams, and that's long been recognized by Global. If you can look at a problem in 15 different ways, you may have 15 different solutions, and that's what diversity brings to an organization.
Very good. Denise, what is your personal definition of diversity and inclusion within leadership?
Sure. So from a diversity perspective, when I look around the room, I'm looking at 4 things. I'm looking to see, do we have somebody in the room within the pillar of culture, from the pillar of just equity, from the pillar of race or gender? And when I don't see that in the room, I'm curious to ask the question, to why? And that just brings into, shining the lens on inclusion. When I've always worked in environments similar to Phyllis, where I worked across 152 countries with 28 regional leaders, and those countries were broken out into those 28 regional leaders. And so I was used to working with a lot of different time zones, different cultures, just everything different. And what I learned most from that, or what I valued most from that, was the inclusion piece of it, and being able to provide a safe space for folks to share their thoughts and their truths and whatever that may be, so that we could come up with a solution to something. So for me, when you have a diverse team coming from those 4 pillars, and then you get into the lens of inclusion, you're providing the agency of a safe space for folks to share their ideas.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. I think that's one of the keys, right? Inclusion. We talk about diversity programs, but until there is inclusion, and I think, Phyllis, you mentioned it, your organization and your definition of meeting people where they're at, and I think that's really the crux of it, right? It's not good enough to say, here's the program, this should be what you need. It's about including someone and getting their feedback and making sure it works. So same question to you, Christy.
Yeah, to me it's about embracing the differences, embracing the different characteristics, backgrounds, uniqueness that diversity brings, being able to leverage that for discussion, for new ideas, also being able to provide a safe place so that you can have that and foster those collaborations and really leverage all the different opportunities that you get by having unique opinions and different views and working together.
Very good. Yeah, I want to come back to this concept of a safe place, so I'm glad you brought that up. Joe, finally, what's your personal definition of diversity and inclusion?
Thanks, Grant. I think that for me, diversity and inclusion are both very overloaded terms that can mean many different things to different people. I knew of a company that thought they were diverse because they had people from Britain, Germany, and France working at their location. So they thought, and if you look at it, that is one valid definition of diversity. They were just diverse. Unfortunately, I think that doesn't hold very well if you come to other locations like Atlanta or Singapore or somewhere else. So, and similarly from an inclusion standpoint, you say, we're very inclusive. We meet every Thursday at a bar and we watch a particular type of game. You say, we're very inclusive, except that some people might not want to do that. So I think it is very possible for you to be diverse and not be inclusive, or be inclusive and not be diverse. And I think it's very easy for organizations to lose sight and say, we are diverse. And I think you mentioned it a little while ago, Grant, in the prep. It's like, nobody asked me. It's like, are we really? So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for there to be confusion around these topics. And so I always approach them with a lot of caution. and they can be charged in a lot of ways because it's really easy to alienate. I had a German guy was like he didn't feel included because he was a German guy, so everybody just assumed that he didn't need support, and he did. So.
Yeah, really good examples, Joe. Christy, you mentioned the term safe place, and I think we all agree that's kind of part of our definitions there, but can we drill that a little bit and just let's try to unpack that and understand what makes it a safe place for someone?
Well, to get a safe place, you need to, I like to feel of it as embracing, and it's more than tolerance, it's acceptance. It's being able to have those conversations, being able to talk to people in the room, and maybe you'll learn something, or maybe you disagree with their view or their political view or their opinion, but that's okay. It's knowing that in the end you're trying to get to a better place, trying to be more understanding, trying to figure out how to work together, live together, be together. It makes it stronger. And when people feel that safeness, they'll open up to you. They'll tell you about how they feel, where they came from, what makes them unique. And so for me, it's just embracing that to be able to get to that safeness.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
Yeah. Who else?
And well, if I may, I think one of the important factors for safety is mutual respect. And I think that has to be built into all of our teams. I've known in the past leaders who were tended to be publicly critical of their people, and it just made me cringe, or would make comments that were just not appropriate. So that's the opposite of psychological safety, if you will. Yeah.
Cool. Other thoughts?
Well, I think you have to be able to express when you are not happy or you don't feel safe, and for other parties to recognize that and say, I'm stepping over a line here that I really shouldn't cross. And I do think that part of being in or creating safe spaces is we're all experimenting, so everybody defines their safe space differently. So we have to be accepting that we are going to, some of us are going to cross lines unintentionally, and so long as it's communicated to you, you accept it, and you go back and say, okay, I need to internalize what was said and adjust to it. I think that's also part of it, because when I meet all of you, I don't know what you define your safe space to be, and I need to actually have conversations with you and to understand that. And for some of you, your safe space might look one way, and for others, it might look very different.
I think that's a wonderful observation. And by the way, I have to say, Grant, I'm absolutely delighted that we've gone from diversity to psychological safety in like 2 baby steps. It was because I think it has to start there. That's part of fostering the leadership. But Brene Brown has an excellent book, Dare to Lead, where she talks about being able to get vulnerable with your people and telling them what you're really feeling, and in turn eliciting from them exactly what they're feeling so that you can meet them where they are.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught that. I think it's important, as you were talking about mutual respect. One of the challenges with panels like this is that I think we've all been somewhat conditioned to, I'll just say it, right? People want to hear the perspective of the angry minority or the angry underserved group, and the reality is we're all humans, and we all think I'd like to think that we can all think in higher capacity. And so when you get to this discussion being more psychological, that applies to all humanity, not based on all the things we've talked about with culture, religion, race, gender, right? We go beyond that. And so that's really where we want to evolve this conversation to. So I do appreciate the dialogue on that, and the fact we can keep it at that level. One of the things that was brought up in this topic just now was that vulnerability and that being able to have what I'm going to call adult conversations, and knowing that we're all leaders and we typically go in knowing what the outcome of a situation will be. I think it takes real courage to say, I'm going to open up a dialogue and I have no friggin' clue where this is going to go. And I don't know if this is going to anger my team or my peers or my leaders, but it's worth talking about and it's worth having a conversation because it's important to me, or I'm advocating for someone else and saying it's important to them and it's worth having that conversation. So again, from my perspective, it's worth as a leader to have that courage to try to open that dialogue yourself and not be waiting on others to do that. Would you guys agree to that?
Yes.
And I would add to that, I read recently that clarity is kindness, that you don't want to pull any punches, that you want to be gentle with the message. But all of us who have managed have had employees that were struggling at some point or another. And to be clear, but not in any way punitive with them about any issues, I think is critically important.
Yeah. You know, one of the other interesting things is we've talked a lot about definition already and what it means to each of us. Let me ask the panel this question. If your ideals and definitions actually are different than the people around you, so whether others in your company, your own friends in your network, you know, the people that you work around, is that the case? And if so, what do you do with that?
We live in a pretty polarized world right now between vaxxers and anti-vaxxers and Democrats and Republicans. So I think we've probably gotten pretty good at being gentle with one another or walking away sometimes.
Yeah?
I can jump in. I think that from a definitional standpoint of whether there's diversity or whether you see diversity within your different organizations, I think it's about stepping back and saying, you know, I have offices in Singapore. I have offices in Buenos Aires, London, Lithuania. So those people, they have their own diversity, their views into diversity, and they need to have the flexibility in order for them to be able to, you know, deal with their own internal diversity issues. I mean, if you go to Australia, you're dealing with Aborigines, you're dealing with Maori people. If you go to Asia Pac, you're dealing with like Chinese New Year versus, you know, the different holidays that you have in different locations. And sometimes I think it's also important that we don't overforce it. I mean, if you go into some smaller markets in the American Midwest, everybody's probably going to be German because there were the people who colonized those areas. So it's kind of hard to walk into a facility in certain parts of the country. I think in Atlanta we can get good diversity, all kinds of diversity, cultural, racial, you know, economic. We can get everything here because we're a big enough market that we can get that. But other locations might not have those luxuries. And as you move around the world, it's different. So I think one of the things that I try to do is I try not to take it with me. So my view of what I consider diverse might not be what other people consider diverse. And so I think it's important to take a step back, take a few minutes to observe before I start judging. And I think it's very easy to just judge without completely understanding, you know, the situation that you find yourself in.
And I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, when you do have a role that takes you to other places around the world, which is something that I did a lot for with Ernst & Young, you know, I was known as the person that had the superpower of collaborating and then also bringing a bunch of people together from all walks of life. And so for me going in, you know, I'm always taking a step back to just see, you know, see the situation I'm coming into and then try to fit in, like try to see what it means to like sit down and fit into what's going on in that moment, and start asking questions that, you know, curiosity is a great thing when you're coming in and having trying to understand a new environment and it's all about diversity in the room. And so I think, you know, when you start to ask questions and start talking to folks and just wanting to learn more about what's going on in that country and in that room, if it's Chinese New Year or if it's you know, Diwali or whatever it may be, I think that's what has started to bring people together. But when you ask the question, you know, does your meaning of diversity differ? Well, yeah, I've had some colleagues say some pretty lewd things, and it gave me the chance to kind of stop and start asking them questions about why they felt that way, so that they can start thinking about it a little bit differently themselves. And sometimes that works, and then sometimes you do walk away.
So Denise, on that point, our audience might find it useful to hear from you in terms of, you mentioned taking the time to fit in and understand the flow of conversation and the environment you're in, but then obviously as a leader in the positions you've been in, being able to push back and say, hey, here's what I feel about it, or here's why I don't feel included in it. How do you strike that balance, or at what point do you shift that gear, right?
So, I'm known as the person that doesn't say much in the beginning. So I'm an observer. I'm not the one person in the room that's speaking the loudest. But when I do have a view, I state it. I'm very transparent, and so, and I know that it's okay to agree to disagree. And I think a lot of times, a lot of leaders feel like they have to agree, or folks that are coming to them, they can't disagree. But I have no problem stating that, no, I disagree with you, and here's why. So that's something that I do in those situations to bring it forward, and when it's time. For me, I have to know when to strike and when that time should be.
I think you bring something up. It's important to ask questions, right? A lot of things are out of fear. And if you can remove the fear by asking the questions and getting comfortable with each other, and then you learn about the different uniqueness, the different characteristics, the cultures, the backgrounds. Once you get over that, it changes everything, and it brings everyone together. You want to be collaborative. You want those different views and opinions. So to me, it's conquering that fear and getting people to accept each other.
Yeah, this feels like the therapy session you were alluding to, right?
Exactly.
Very
Well,
much.
but curiosity about whoever you're meeting across the table is coming across as a key attribute, and I love that. And I love your superpower, by the way. I wish I could grow up to be there. That's awesome. Thank you.
Very good, very good. Well, let's get tactical for a minute, if you guys don't mind. What's something we can give the audience in terms of one concrete example of something either you yourself or your organization has done to help, I would say, advance the definitions that we've talked about? Anyone willing to share that?
Yeah, I can share.
Go ahead.
So for me, I think it's important to, I go into corporations and I'm immediately looking for their employee resource groups, and I'm trying to see which ones out there outside of just, which ones out there I could be the minority for. So I have sponsored the Pan-Asian employee resource group. I've been an ally and a huge advocate for our LGBTQ plus group and community. And so I do a lot of things where I end up being the minority because I want to learn more. I want to be an advocate. I want to be an ally. I want to get in there. And I think that's something that I always like to share with folks when they ask me, what can I do to help? I also think that for the men in the room, since we are at a technology event, if there is a woman that you see is doing a great job, don't be afraid to give her props. And don't be afraid to go ahead and give her a recommendation, whether that's on LinkedIn or wherever that may be, because that really matters. And I don't necessarily see that a lot quite yet, so I feel like there's opportunity there.
I think for me, one of the things I've done as a hiring manager is try and break a job down to its basics. So I'm not hiring someone who looks like all of the other people who are doing that job. So that, I like to think, takes it at least a step beyond what should that person look like, how should they speak, what do they believe in, into basic skills. Can they problem solve? What are their communication skills like, right? And that's critically important for all of us who are trying to resource in this day and age, the day of the Great Resignation, because we have to look at people a little bit differently. We have to look at the promotable, and we have to look at that person that maybe has never considered security as a career, but has tremendous problem-solving skills?
So for us, SPR has been around 173 years. So obviously we've had to make some shifts and some changes. I'm the first female CIO ever for the company. And we recently had new ownership about 2 years ago, and that was one of the first things they noticed. We needed to really further diversify, and we needed to look into that. So one of the first things they did was we created a D&I committee, a council. And the council meets monthly, and they put out these quarterly newsletters, which are great. They highlight all the different cultural events that are happening during that period, the different celebrations. They highlight different people, the celebrations of the month. If the month is Black History Month or Women's International Month, they'll highlight those months and people within the company within that to just show what we have. They've also started to promote within. We now have more female senior leaders than the company's ever had. And then the other big thing from an HR perspective, right, again, with the Great Resignation, it's recruiting. So trying to be more diverse in the recruiting, venture out to a variety of job boards, looking to broaden that pool and trying to intentionally make sure that you're bringing in talent and talent of diverse features so that you can get that collaboration you're looking for.
Yeah, I think that at my company, I think it's about empowerment and understanding. I think we need to empower our managers in the different geographies to go and try to solve the problems that they need to solve with the resources that they have available within those particular markets. And I think there's also needs to be somewhat of an understanding, or we have an understanding of sometimes departments look certain ways because that's what's being produced by our universities and our schools. So if I go look at my engineering departments, and I would say that's probably consistent for all of you here, it's somewhat male dominated. But if you go look at the numbers that are being produced out of universities, we are just frankly not producing enough women and enough minority engineer candidates or technologists that we can then go hire. So to an extent, we might look bad in certain contexts, but you might have people who are really trying to be diverse, but they can't because we're kind of locked in. I think even though we are a diverse group, we're still in the business of business, right? If I'm gonna go and have open heart surgery, you want a heart surgeon, and you can't just make those. It takes a long time to make those. It takes a long time to make engineers. And so I think that's where the understanding has to come in of saying, that manager could very well be trying very hard, and they just don't have doors that are open to them. And I think we as a society have to recognize that, and we have to go and approach the sources. I think that's where being a part of local programs that promote STEM, local programs that encourage scholarships for certain demographics to go to school, and correct some of these long-term inequities that exist within our societies, wherever we may be in the world. I think that's important. So we need to have that empowerment and that understanding.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I really appreciate the panel giving those very, very succinct, very specific examples. Denise, going back to you, one of the things you mentioned was being an ally for different groups. Let me throw this back out to the audience. We talk about that a lot, and we see that on banners and over the receptionist desk. There's all these words like be an ally and all that. But I think great example of actually doing it and giving it some life. For the audience, I'd love to just see, has anyone ever been referred to as the token blank, fill in the blank, in a group? Come on. Really?
No?
Yeah. Not your face.
But
yeah.
you knew it.
But
Did you know?
somehow, you're right. Even if it's not said, you feel it, right? You feel it. And I think, Denise, I love that example of where you are intentionally trying to stick yourself into places where people might feel that. And that's how we're going to make the change, right? We're aware of it, and then we're willing to do something about it. So I think that takes a lot of bravery. I appreciate that. Phyllis, I love what you mentioned about breaking a job down into the basics. And I think to me that speaks to a humanity problem. We've all gotten lazy. You know, at my table, number one, just thank you Apex for the dessert bar. First off, you're gonna get a huge review on that. My table thinks it was like 5-star. But we also talked about how, you know, there's kind of this wave of laziness that's taken over, and the pandemic only helped heighten what was a big problem. And I think a lot of us as leaders haven't taken the time to really, as Phyllis points out, break a job down. It's not about hiring, you know, we even do it from a security side, right? Oh, let's build this profile on the last person to hold the job. That's the wrong kind of thinking. And I think what Phyllis has given an example of is if you take the time to break down what you actually need, you might find that, you know, you can hire someone to do work at 3 in the morning as easily as 3 in the afternoon. I know there's been a lot of debate about should we come back to the office or not, and it really hinges on what are you trying to do? Are you running an organization for show, or are you running it for result? And so a great example in that, you know, Christy, you mentioned being a forerunner, right? Being the first female CIO at your 173-year-old company. That tells you something. But you know, to me, I think of that as the first there, you inevitably are taking a lot of hits. You're taking bullets for all who are going to follow you, right? You're the lesson learned, right? You're the one that has to suffer through the first time someone makes an insensitive comment or has to deal with, you know, the challenges of this scenario. But I think that's a huge, again, going back to that concept of courage, right? Knowing that situation and still powering through it, you know, that's great. Joe, one of the things that you talked about was localizing things and maybe not making everything so broad, so supporting and finding local programs to be a part of. So again, I hope people are seeing these some really good tactical examples, and I really appreciate the panel being willing to share that. The final question I have for everyone here is, okay, we've talked about this now for a little bit. Can you guys define what does success look like for you? So with diversity, equality, inclusion, all these things, how do we know we've actually accomplished our goal of making a difference or doing something better?
I'll start. Well, first of all, I don't think it's a goal. I think it's a journey. And I think it's when we look around and we may say, yeah, we have a diverse workforce, but do you really have a diverse workforce? Have you looked at beyond the support roles? Have you looked up into the thought leadership? Have you really looked into every level of the organization? Some organizations don't think about it from that perspective. They say, sure, we have diversity, but when you break it down into the different levels, there's really not that level of diversity. So it's taking that journey into all the different levels and moving everyone forward.
Yeah, I love that.
And really, it's about the best person in that job, right? And no barriers for that person being able to achieve that.
I think success is also, you know, making sure that that person, you know, removing those barriers, but making sure they do keep trajecting to wherever they'd like to go. So, you know, you didn't just put them there and they're just the face and then, you know, you don't hear about them anymore, but just making sure that they actually are moving along.
Investing in your talent.
Empowered.
Yeah, investing and empowering in your talent.
Yeah, as leaders, I think one of the best things we can do is eliminate barriers. I mean, you do that all the time, whether it's a project, whether it's something that you deal with your leadership peers or your board of directors, whatever it is. Most of the time is spent removing barriers, so why wouldn't we apply that to the human aspect as well? Great point.
Yeah, I think that success really depends on, you know, when we as a society, as societies of the world, realize that we no longer have much of a need for diversity and inclusion panels. I mean, if you would just look, if you just go to a session and you say they are run by different people from different ethnicities, different different genders, different sexes, I think that starts to measure success. I mean, we had a chance to speak a couple of weeks ago in Miami, and I think you were at that one, Grant, and we were there, and we were not speaking on diversity and inclusion. We were speaking on leadership and management, which is what we are professionally first and foremost. So I think when we start going out there and seeing that, the keynotes being given by a woman, and our workforces, we're not leaving our workforces behind. I think to Christy's point, one big chart from a McKinsey study that was done last year on women in the workforce is that we have a lot of diversity in corporate America at the entry level. But as you progress through the career, as you progress through your career, you start losing them. And there was a really interesting study that said that by the time you get to be CEO, it was like we've lost most women. And I think that there are some fundamental changes that we have to make in society of, for better, for worse, probably for better, only women can bear children in our society. And those periods of time where women leave the workforce, we don't give them credit. So, I think we lose a ton of women at that point, and they can just never recover. They can just never, we just never get those numbers back to where they make it into the CEO, into the C-suite, or into board positions. And the same thing is true for minorities. And I think a lot of it has to do with just little things like we play golf. There are a lot of people who don't play golf. And if you only sponsor events that center around certain types of activities, like watching football or drinking alcohol or going to rugby games, you're subconsciously creating an environment that's not inclusive, that's leaving people out from other cultures. And those things are important because in early parts of your careers, you change companies, and then that person that you were working with is now a seller at another company, and they're selling to you, or you're buying from them. And if you had a chance to socialize with certain people and form some of these deeper bonds, people get advantages from those things, from having those kinds of relationships. So by alienating people subconsciously in the early parts of their careers, it makes it much more difficult for those people to progress later on in their careers. And I think it would be very interesting if we could be more conscious and intentional about how we form relationships early in their careers and how to remove some of these issues that we have where we just say, if you're not in the office, you're not adding value to society, and therefore you won't get promoted. We need to be able to credit some of these things.
There was a great leveling, I think, with the pandemic, and all of a sudden, those of us who had been in the office were on the same footing with those, perhaps in another country, who have been on the phone all these times. To your point, Joe, about women leaving, a mom, and now a grandmom, and you do step away, and we don't teach our students coming up through the ranks necessarily how to network, and that can be difficult. Team sports for girls have been in the last 25 years, right? And our fathers are missing out. There's a whole lot of child raising going on that they don't get to participate in. So the leveling works both ways.
Yeah, that goes back to your point. It's not just the laziness in a job description, but I think we have to redefine our gender-specific roles or familiar roles, things that have been traditionally stereotyped or pigeonholed for people. There's no reason that the male figure in a family can't have those experiences, and there's no reason that the female figure can't be the one working, right? So again, where are all these hard and fast guidelines that have been set forth, and why can't we change that? But I love this, and I think this is digging at some of the subtleties, right? Like the micro inequities that we deal with, the barriers that we deal with. You mentioned this being a journey, and you're absolutely right. Like any journey, you learn as you go. And I think, at first we were very ignorant about it, and then we shed light on it, and now our challenge is to take that next step, which is we no longer can be blind to it. We have the tools and the right articulation around how to address it, and now the next step is what are we going to do about it? And so I think these are great. Yeah, these are great examples of action. I really appreciate that.
Grant and Joe, one question is, on the management panel that you were on, did diversity and inclusion come up as a topic?
It actually did not. I think it was more a function of the time and the topic that we had. But, well, I shouldn't say that. You know, we actually had some questions from the audience that revolved around, I would say, diversity of thought, not necessarily diversity of skin, color, gender, sexual orientation, but we spoke on a topic related to what an organization can consume, how it deals with projects, and then the wake and the ramifications it causes. And some of those questions were around, well, what if someone thinks X and the result is Y? And so it was a diversity of thought more than anything else.
That's where it starts. I like that.
Yeah. So good points. Is there anything else the panel wants to share? We've got we're going to save some time for questions from the audience at the end. But anything that I haven't asked you guys that you're dying to get off your chest? Okay. Well, I believe we want to open up for questions. Alejandro's probably going to walk around the microphone.
Or jog.
Or jog, yeah. Get your steps in.
Hey, so you had made the comment about schools, a lot of the typical places that we get our new talent from, don't have the right inclusion ratios that we'd like to be building in our environments. Doesn't that mean that we need to fix that at the like we can't fix the university system, but to recognize that and say now we need to make sure that we are specifically fixing that problem by looking at non-university paths, looking at historically black colleges. Security is one of those places that we thrive. People thrive with non-technical degrees, and being able to get those people from those others. I think that's a kind of a key highlight to be able to say yes, but shouldn't we find that and be able to say here's a way of fixing it is to go look for those other sources?
I think that's an excellent point. I think for a long time in corporate America, I think there was a lack of diversity in how we recruited people. The expectation was that people did certain things. They went, if you wanted to be in management, you had to go to a university, you had to get a 4-year degree, you had to get some work experience, and you had to go back for your MBA, and you had to do certain things. You had to follow this regimented path. If you wanted to be a lineman or an electrician, you had to go be a journeyman, and you had to do these things. I think that's very important that, I think Grant brought it up earlier of, don't just go and look at the role description. What are you trying to accomplish? Is your job, is the job that you're hiring for, can that best be accomplished by 3 part-time people or just one person? And is the skill set one that requires a bachelor's degree, or does it require a different type of trait? So I think that corporations, there's some citizenship that has to be exercised by large corporations saying, what do we need? So we can't just throw it back at the educational system. I think that particularly as organizations get very large and have large numbers of employees, I think it's incumbent upon them to say, how am I going to recruit the next generation of workforce that we need, and then go out into the market, go out into schools, into society, and produce what we need. And I think to an extent also it needs to be local, and I think we need to recognize these things of saying, I need certain types of engineering people. So I am going to volunteer personally time in helping women, young girls move into STEM fields, or sponsoring hackathons, and getting 16-year-old kids excited about those kinds of skills. So yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I want to share that, yes, that's exactly what you want to start seeing more of, and I am a very proud first cohort member of Black VC, which was a corporation or a nonprofit that was started because they started to see that there wasn't a lot of diversity in the venture capital space. I am in venture, and I love venture, but I didn't grow up in venture. I'm also a first-generational wealth builder. So with that coming, in my atmosphere, what I was really excited about is that they came together, worked with Salesforce, worked with the Berkeley Executive Education Department, and put together a program where they were intentional about bringing more diverse folks into the venture ecosystem. So, it's something that they're intentional, they continue to do it. Right now, we've got about 300 people who have gone through the program, and I think that the more programs that we see like that you can attach yourself to, if that's something that's one of your passions, do that, because that's what we need out there.
That's awesome. I think, too, we have to shift it left. So recently, and many of you may have seen it on LinkedIn, our CISO, a woman, was at one of the local elementary schools, local to one of our offices, right? We need to inculcate the idea of you can do this at the earliest age possible.
I agree.
Yeah, it's a great question, so thank you for that. If you guys notice in your app, underneath the sponsor page, there's actually an icon there for the It Girls Foundation. That is actually my nonprofit, and what Joe was alluding to was he's been a longtime supporter of this 501c3 charity that I run, but basically it's a STEM program for 4th and 5th grade girls, because we recognize, to your point, there is a gap in our education system. And so what It Girls does is it goes into the elementary schools and teaches girls specifically what this panel's talked about, which is, hey, there's a lot of micro inequities out there. You're going to face them. And us complaining about it doesn't make them go away, but how do we deal with it? And so we give them the insight and the visibility, and I would say the exposure to the real world. And it's thanks to the speakers like Joe, and I'm hoping to recruit these other panelists here to join the cause. But I do appreciate the Apex allowing me to talk about my nonprofit there. But I think it does address the heart of the question there. So great. Other questions?
Yeah, I think that's great, Grant. And to your point, and I think Ben was talking earlier about his as well savvy cyber kids, and we're talking today, and I think it's good to strategize, but at some point, it's like, what could we have done yesterday to start these types of things? And I think everybody in this room can say that we're leaders, right? And so I think first we have to look internally and say, okay, what does our mentee group and mentee pipeline look like? And Christy, I think your story is phenomenal. And at some point it's like, okay, so who mentored me, and how did they help me get set up for success? And what does my mentee pipeline look like, and how am I helping others set up for success? Because diversity doesn't start and end with your hiring pipeline, right? It's all the way up through the ranks. And so wasn't just a comment, I also have a question. But mostly for Denise, because I'm also in kind of like the supply chain space. And so knowing it's kind of like, Cox is, you're bridging the gap kind of between that operations and tech space. And a lot of that can be very challenging, because you're battling not only, your typical kind of diversity challenges, but there's also other cultural challenges internally, right, between an operational and IT and technological space. So can you talk about a little bit about what are some of the differences between some of those challenges and kind of battling some of both of those fronts between a tech and operational space, and how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that question. I come across that quite a bit. So a lot of times when we've all been on those calls where somebody kind of throws the bomb over the fence, and you're like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. And so a lot of times after the call, I'm the person that'll go and talk to that person who threw it and start asking the questions. It goes back to my curiosity. I'm like, I wonder why they're so angry or not so amenable to the solution, or what's going on. And a lot of times out of that question, having that conversation, one, they're appreciative that I've come to them, talked to them separately on the side. I didn't say anything to them in the call and call them out or anything like that. But then the second part of it just provides that building trust piece. And then I'm saying, hey, this is a safe space. Talk to me. What's going on? What's happening? From there, you know, whatever it may be, it sometimes turns into a counseling session. But you know, we go, you know, I really think that we have to bring empathy back at the executive level. It's not there all the time, so I just think, you know, having that empathetic lens going into these situations and talking to folks helps you, you know, bridge some of the barriers that are there. So, you know, that is one way that I, you know, can turn a situation around or bring somebody in. And we might still agree to disagree with whatever the solution may be, but it's just not that elephant in the room anymore because we've discussed it. We brought it back to the room and, you know, had more discussions about it and kept it going. So that, you know, that's how I work. You know, I've tried lots of different ways of bringing people together, and you know, sometimes it just doesn't work, right? And so you have to figure out what's next, and that's when you dive into what are the transferable skills that are here that I can, you know, help them move into something different, because maybe this just is not the right space for you, but nobody had that transparent conversation with this person before. And so now I'm having it, and I'm very genuine in it, and now I want to bring you to something else that you might be more happy in. So,
Yeah, that empathy at the exec level, it is degrading, and I think we have to all work to getting that back. So that's a great comment. Thanks for the question. We are closing in on time here, so I just want to personally thank.
One final one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for such a great discussion. And Grant, this question is for you. And this is regarding diversity. I wanted to build on your point on diversity of thoughts. And 1 in 4, I think 1 in 4 people in America have some kind of disability. And that's the group that I feel is underrepresented. And we are in tech, so we are forward thinking. Just wanted to understand from you, what are your thoughts around bringing that group forward, right? There is acceptance, but then when people with unique abilities join workforce, they need accommodations and everything that goes with it, right? So just wanted to get your thoughts around people with unique abilities and what can we do to bring them back to the workforce.
That's a great question. I think you're right. That is a very underrepresented group. Whenever we talk about diversity and inclusion, we often forget the folks with disabilities. I think going back to a comment earlier, the pandemic, if there is a silver lining, did help level set some of those things. Not all, but some of those things. So for folks who are physically disabled, or for getting into an office, and if that was a challenge and that's what kept them from opportunities, I think the pandemic was actually helpful in level setting to getting us back to even playing fields. If we can take that as an example and build off it, and again, I love what the panel had said about, not being lazy and breaking down what you actually need to do, right? And what does the job require? I think you'll find that you don't need it necessarily all in one package, in one person. You can break those things down. And I think, again, it goes back to, as an executive, as a leader, are you willing to put that work in? Are you willing to sit there and take your time and think through and say, at the root of it, what am I looking for, right? What is it that I'm trying to achieve? And it all comes back to what we've talked about: intention, your mission, what is it you're trying to achieve? And so, yeah, I take that as a challenge to myself every day to say, regardless of your capabilities, I need a specific result in action. And if someone can do that for me, whether or not they are physically here, whether they have hearing impairments, speech impediments, whatever it is, if I can still get that result, isn't it worth trying to achieve it that way? So again, yeah, I appreciate the awareness being brought to it. I agree with you. I don't think it's something that we focus enough on, and we really should. All right. Well, that's our time. Again, I want to thank the panelists myself, and thank you guys as an audience. Thank you all out there in live stream land. It's been a pleasure.